Let's start out just briefly by telling me who Michael Kraft was.
Okay. Michael Kraft, before Joe Cain got real popular in Mobile, Michael Kraft was probably better known. Michael Kraft was an individual. He was a very, like most people in Mobile involved in Mardi Gras, was a character. He was from Pennsylvania. He had one eye, so he walked around, with his eye closed, not because he was winking at the girls, but because he couldn't see out of that eye, and that was before the artificial eyes were real popular. But Michael Kraft is credited with the very first mystic society, not only in Mobile, but in the New World, or in all the world, because nowhere else do you have mystic societies. They call them crews in New Orleans and crews in some of the other cities along the Gulf Coast. Nowhere else in the world do you have mystic societies except those that grew out of Michael Kraft's original mystic society. He did not start Mardi Gras, neither did Joe Cain start Mardi Gras, but he started what we know today is the heart of Mardi Gras, the mystic society or the crew.
Clear up some of the confusion here too. Who started Mardi Gras? If it wasn't Joe Cain and if it wasn't Mr. Kraft, I know there's a lot of people that point fingers in a lot of directions. When did Mardi Gras start? How did it start? And kind of take us back to the very, very beginning.
Okay, well, you really don't want to go back to the very beginning because that's like the 6th century BC in Egypt when they had some fertility rituals out in the field. But most people in this area know that Mardi Gras is a French term. So we get most of our Mardi Gras from France. That leads it to Mobile, New Orleans. Okay, Mobile, to the best of all of our knowledge and historians, had the first Mardi Gras celebration in 1703. This was at the old Mobile site up where the plants are now. A soldier wrote back to France, wrote back home, talking about it. Basically, it consisted of a big party on Mardi Gras, or Fat Tuesday, between the soldiers participated in it, the residents, the little inhabitants of the town, and the native Indians, which was very significant. So everybody in the area that was there participated in the first Mardi Gras. Now, a few years earlier, in 1699, there had been a piece of water over on the Mississippi-Louisiana coast that had been named Point de Mardi Gras. It happened to be discovered around Mardi Gras, and the French at the time were there, and they named it that, but that is all they did. It would be like standing by this bush on Valentine's Day and saying, that's Valentine Bush. So it was not a celebration. It was just they remembered that it was Mardi Gras and named that piece of water for Mardi Gras. But the first celebration was in 1703. Now, New Orleans was not founded until 1718. But then people will say, but there were no parades. That's right, they weren't. They were just celebrations. The little Fort de la Louis de la Mobile was very small. When it flooded and they moved to the present site of Mobile in 1711 is when they started the parades. And the parades were very French. It was the Boeuf Gras, B-O-E-U-F, Gras Society, symbolizing the last meat, the fatted ox that you could eat before Lent. And these parades took place on Mardi Gras itself from 1711 up until the war between the states in 1860. 1711, we still don't have New Orleans even founded yet.
So it's definitely before New Orleans, no question about that.
Right. So then we talk about mystic societies, or as they call them in New Orleans crews, and goes back to Michael Kraft. Michael Kraft, as we mentioned, he's a one-eyed Pennsylvanian. He was a cotton broker by trade. Young man. Came to Mobile, got into the cotton business. Him and a group of his friends were celebrating New Year's Eve in 1830. The custom was, in those days, that all the captains would open up the ships and you could go on and party and have a good time. Well, Michael and all of his buddies, as young men would today, had made the rounds. They had done it very well. They had been to every ship they could go to, and this was after midnight. They'd already rung in the New Year. On the way home, they, like young men will, they weren't ready to go home. So they stopped at a hardware store, Partridge's Hardware. There was one young man in the group named Partridge, so we think it was probably his father's hardware, but some accounts say they broke in. But be that as it may, they got these instruments. They got cowbells, they got rakes, they got hoes. One of them even hopped on an old mule and was making his way through the little city. You have to visualize, you got a little town, iron lacework, fences and porches, and a city that didn't stretch much past where Spanish Plaza is today, maybe, a little bit farther. They woke up the entire town. This is, again, after probably 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. They ended up at the mayor's house, John Stocking, and his house sat right there next to where our city museum is today as part of what is Spanish Plaza, and they woke him up. Now, probably if he had made any choice except the one he did, we may not have mystic societies today. But he made the right choice, us that are involved in Mardi Gras, and the money that it brings in, and the publicity it gets us, and the fun it brings, safety valve, whatever you want to put. Those of us that like Mardi Gras think he made the right decision. He invited them in for refreshments. And that just added fuel. They said, we had a good time. So then they started organizing. Next year they planned on doing it. And they got more organized. They started wearing costumes. They started bringing cows with them. They named themselves after a couple of years of calling themselves the New Year's Eve Revelers and the Midnight Revelers. They said, we need a real name. And they called themselves the Cabellian de Rankin Society after the cowbells and the rakes. They continued to get more elaborate until 1840. And in 1840, unfortunately, Michael Kraft died the year before in Pascagoula of yellow fever. But in 1840, the Cabellians, or the cows as they were called, put on the very first parade of any kind in this country, in the United States, with a theme and costumes to match. It was called at that time Heathen Gods and Goddesses. And they continued to have these grand parades well up until the end of the century, and then they continued to meet after that. Joe Kane had already come in and done his thing.
About to say, in steps Joe Kane now.
Right.
Joe Kane's credited for what?
Joe Kane revived Mardi Gras. When the war between the states broke out, everything stopped. That's the only thing, incidentally, that's ever stopped Mardi Gras in Mobile. It has been a major war. Every major war, then Mardi Gras kind of stops if it's a real bona fide war. So the war between the states, everything stopped. The Buff Gras on Mardi Gras stopped. The Cabellians on New Year's Eve. The Strikers who had come in on New Year's Eve as well. The tea drinkers on New Year's Eve. Everything stopped. So after the war was over and the South had surrendered to the Union, Joe Kane decided that, and we don't know why he decided to do this, we just know he did, to dress up as a Chickasaw Indian chief, called himself Slackabama Renico. And we don't know what that name means, but it sounds good. And it's not hard to say if you break it down in syllables, Slackabama Renico. And he proceeded to parade through the streets in a charcoal wagon. He was driving it. I mean, they weren't throwing anything. That's a recent development. So, and some of his war buddies were in the back playing instruments. It lifted the spirits of the little town of Mobile, and then from that point, that was in 1866, beginning the very next year, a new organization started springing up and parading on Mardi Gras, the Autumn Mist, which parade to this day on Mardi Gras night. So I think they're 126-year-old this year.
When did throws come into play?
Throws are relatively late. If you'll look at some of the early archive pictures that the University of South Alabama has, even after the turn of the century, you'll see all of the people just standing very still. They may occasionally wave, but very little throwing. When they first started throwing, they would throw serpentine, but it was not to throw it to the people watching the parade, but it was to make, to throw it and let it unwind, and the pretty sight. There's 2 or 3 versions of why we ended up throwing things. One has to do with that they always would carry things on the float to give to people they saw. And the story goes that one year in particular, it was a real rainy Mardi Gras, and it was muddy, and the people couldn't get up closer to the floats. These were fairly low floats in those days, not like the ones we have today. But they couldn't get up because it was muddy, and the ladies in the gowns and dresses. So they started throwing it out to them. And then what happened is everybody started scrambling, and it just kind of snowballed from there. Traditionally, you'll hear it said that, well, the ancient kings of, even in the Middle Ages and back in Europe would come to their towns, and they would throw money or coins to the peasants on the street. But we have no indication that has anything to do with why we throw the stuff today. It's just that they did that, but that's not why we do it. It was just it was a spontaneity that grew up.
What about the future? What do you see happening over the next several years?
I see Mardi Gras continuing to grow. It's bigger now than it's been in many years. All of the organizations are, with a few exceptions, are just packed with people. New organizations are coming in. There's a brand new one that started about 3 years ago. They're parading for the second time this year. There's a new group that of couples that are trying to get on the streets in '94. Some of the existing organizations, if you get voted in, you will not be able to even ride in a parade for 5 years because of the waiting list, people wanting to get in. That's not unusual for this time either, because every time the United States exits some type of conflict, you have a spurt in Mardi Gras activity. It happened with the Spanish-American War, it happened in World War I, War between the States, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and now the Gulf War. And why that is, sociologists can tell us maybe, but it happens.
Do you see a lot of changes? I mean, we've seen a lot over the years. You think 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now we'll recognize it?
Oh, I think we will recognize it, just as those people, if they were come back from 1890, would recognize it today. It would be different, but it will be recognizable. We may end up, we don't know. We may end up with self-motorized units, self-contained like they do in some other parades. Of course, there's a cost factor in that.
Right.
The nature of the celebration may, because we're growing so big, it may fragment. We may have, instead of one big parade on a given night, we may have two smaller parades in two different parts of town, or like we've already seen that across the bay. Fairhope has two parades now. Gulf Shores has got two, one in Gulf Shores, one in Orange Beach, one on Dolphin Island. Pritchett has revived one of theirs out in the Pritchett area that they used to have. So we're just seeing a proliferation of Mardi Gras, not only growth within the existing, but out.
I know we're probably running out of tape real quick, though. Why do you think people like Mardi Gras? What's the fascination?
It's hard to say, but if you can just think about what you see at Mardi Gras, you see babies, you see 80 and 90-year-old people, you see blacks, you see whites, you see Hispanics, you see people coming from all over the country. You see those that are rich, that are poor, that are in between, like the majority of us, all out having a good time. Where else do you get this type of camaraderie and fun? Unfortunately, we don't get it in our churches. That's one of the problems that we've been fighting in the church I go to get that, where you have, that's for the young people, that's for the old people. That's not true. It's, it has something for everybody, every age group. And I don't know what causes that, but it's kind of a way of life. It's a spirit that, it's not like going to one parade, a rose parade, and you build up and you have the rose parade and you sit there and you wave and you go home and say, wasn't that pretty? You're involved. When you go down to a parade, you're involved and you want to go back the next night and the next night and the next night. Mardi Gras could not really exist as a one event thing. It could exist, but it wouldn't be Mardi Gras, even though Mardi Gras theoretically is one day. It has to be the whole. And I think that Mobile has done that quite well. New Orleans has done it quite well. Other cities have tried and have not done it so well. He and his wife was buried down there, like a coffin, a wooden box. And because he had lived in his later years down there. And he brought him back to Mobile, and they buried him over in the, I guess it's the northwest corner of the cemetery. Had a big celebration of all the family. Like I say, they buried him over there. In the interim, they found out there had been okay, let's talk about this. This is a takeoff on the emblem of the Cabellians. You can see it's got a cow with his bell on, and it's got a rake. And we think this is a spittoon cow, and the Cabellian Rankin. The rake was very much a part of it, but to us it symbolized, that he's now at rest. He's laid his rake up against the tree, and so this was a very.
Did he design this? No one knows.
No one knows.
What does this say right here?
It says Michael Kraft and the date he was born here, Bristol, Pennsylvania, and then of course he died, and the date he died in Pascagoula in 1839 needs to be cleaned off where it can be read
a little bit easier.
But
they're bringing back this emblem?
Yeah, the new resurrected Cabellian Society has taken, instead of taking the original Cabellian emblem logo, they took this because they're incorporated as the Michael Kraft Memorial Society or Association.